Hello and welcome. My name is Justin Emmers. I'm a director here at MindPoint Group. I just want to say a big thanks to DLT for hosting this webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about, well, Ansible. It's my longtime favorite subject now, and specifically how Ansible and really automation end up playing in an age of COVID, right? I mean, this thing has disrupted so much of what businesses and organizations are dealing with today. So for starters, I thought it would be interesting if we did a little bit of an introduction on just really who MindPoint Group is. So there's a good chance you probably have not yet heard of us. However, we are relatively old in this space. We've been working in cybersecurity for well over a decade now, largely with U.S. government customers, where we are helping them really identify and defend against threats, close all their security gaps, and manage their risk. What's also interesting is that we really focus on the people that we both employ and the people that we work with on the customer side. We've got a broad range of experience, everything from policy generation to policy implementation to GRC work, cloud security, governance, risk compliance, and so forth. Really, any discipline in cybersecurity you can think of, there's a very good chance that we have a significant amount of experience with it. And what's also good about all of the work that we've done is over time we've gotten quite sharp with a number of technologies, one of which is Ansible. So we're not just cybersecurity experts, but in fact we're also automation experts. Myself included, I came from Ansible, then was acquired by Red Hat, where I led that business for about 5 years prior to coming over here to the MindPoint Group, where we've built a larger team of automators that are ready to help organizations automate. So we have a really deep experience, not just in cybersecurity, but also in the use of automation and specifically Ansible to help organizations improve their cybersecurity posture. Now, I kind of alluded to this before, but yeah, this has been an interesting, one would joke that it's the longest year/decade that they've ever felt, because it certainly has already felt like a decade. I know I've got a couple of young kids at home, and it's been quite interesting since March, trying to do homeschooling and chase them around and whatnot. But really, I think that the impact to various organizations and businesses has been even far greater. For starters, you have all of these employees that have children that suddenly are less productive than they had been before. And followed on from that, you have these organizations now that are just under this massive crush and pressure as a result of all of the changes necessary to adapt to a post-COVID world and a pandemic world. And so, the joke was, and I think I'd seen this on either LinkedIn or Twitter, but in the end, like before, digital transformation or DX was always something that was being driven by some executive leader within a business. But as we all know, that when disruptive events happen, that's an ample opportunity to reevaluate where your organization is and what are the things that you need to do in order to persist. So if you look at the types of things that have happened, really, none of it's particularly surprising, right? I mean, most organizations, government included, have been dealing with some level of remote work for some time. What's perhaps new, however, are that there are certain classes of employees now that are being asked to work remotely that hadn't really done that before. So maybe remote work is new to portions of the workforce. There are just operational issues and challenges to an increasingly distributed workforce. And having all of these people virtually, if you built your organization like that, it's not that big of a deal. But for an org that is really used to having everyone kind of in the same spot, there's a lot of changes to how these teams are actually working. From the customer side, there's of course an overly extensive reliance on all things digital now. And we've seen this in technology for some time now. Just from an enterprise IT perspective, many customers, enterprise IT customers for that matter, really expect from their business tooling the same level of access and same level of usability that they have for their personal apps or non-work apps. And so you've seen the proliferation of a lot of these applications from enterprise software providers to really make it much easier and much more fluid and natural to access and really improve the UX of their interfaces. But there's also, of course, this big expectation of personalization. So when we say customers here, we're not just talking about the actual customer of your organization, whether that's a citizen, a constituent, an internal customer of some variety. This also heavily applies to how organizations support their own employees. The employees themselves have an experience to bear with the orgs in which they work. And so all of these changes and all of these new demands are really heavily increasing the pressure that's actually put on already stretched IT teams. And this comes from a number of different areas, many of which automation fundamentally helps with. So scalability and access. I mean, if you think about just from an IT perspective, where your business has made investments, there's a good chance that like having a really fast internet connection and a really great Wi-Fi network in your corporate office really isn't helping you right now. What's more interesting too is those groups that perhaps were relying on old POTS systems like plain old telephone system type phones. If that's not all virtualized and you don't have IP phones out there, it's not like all of those workers can just pick a phone up and go home, right? So it puts just huge stresses on some of these traditional teams that in many cases perhaps were already kind of undergoing a bit of change anyway. And that then ties directly into investment changes. So the distributed workforce has massively different requirements of their workspaces and their access than do folks that are in facility. I mentioned kind of phones before, like it's the same thing when you as an internal customer are attempting to contact someone. Like you just have a greater expectation of being able to do things self-service. Like no longer is hopping on a call center or meeting someone at the office cafeteria going to be sufficient anymore. So you got to find new ways to kind of pull all of these people in and help them work more effectively with one another. The other interesting thing here is that really manual tasks in this distributed world suddenly get way more expensive and difficult. So I've talked with a number of customers, both government and commercial, that are suddenly faced with this notion that, oh, you know what, we didn't realize that this one critical workflow still relied on a paper statement somewhere, or someone that had to be on site to manually do something. And it's amazing how many of those process interruptions have occurred because organizations didn't fully understand the implications of ripping people out of the office. Another big concern for CIOs and CISOs alike really is this idea of data privacy and security. So, you know, no longer can you be relatively certain that much of your data is kind of living within the walls of your environment. You've got all of this distributed teams now. With distributed teams comes distributed data. It becomes much harder to make sure that these items are restricted. It makes it much harder to kind of keep control of all of these things. So there's a huge data privacy aspect to this. There's a huge cybersecurity aspect to this. And there's also a lot of training. I mean, we all know that the employee in many cases is one of the weakest links in organizations. So what are the types of things that we can do to kind of remove the human from some of these processes, remove the steps, automate, frankly. Another aspect here are Wi-Fi and VPNs and all kinds of other internet access concerns. You know, I mean, it's not uncommon. You see this all over the place, and I bet you a number of you have friends that have just decided to say, you know what, our kids are in virtual school, or we don't have school right now, so we're just going to go rent a place in the mountains or rent a place at the beach or do whatever, get out of their normal confines. And so now they're into a weird space with perhaps a weird network that you have no idea really what's actually happened there. So encrypting your traffic, VPNs, all of those things become even increasingly more important when you have a distributed team. And then I kind of touched on it before again, but this user experience, like there is very much a ease of use expectations. I mean, I remember in my past life at Red Hat, we switched from Oracle Financials doing our expenses in that tool to Concur I mean, it was like totally game changing to actually have a simple app, take pictures of your receipts with, and just have everything work. And I mean, it's kind of basic stuff, but it provided such a massive benefit to all of the employees that it actually took a lot of the pain out of doing expenses. But that's a good example of how kind of technology drives some of that employee satisfaction as well. And then, of course, externally and frankly internally focused as well, you have this idea of all the new offerings and the agility that you would normally want to provide. So the more automation that you have in these spaces, the more agility that you're really going to be able to get out of it, not just for your internal purposes, but also your external ones. Now, what's kind of interesting is the automation discussions that we've been having really have started to shift a bit. Pre-COVID, so call it like March, at least for us, March 15th or before, really companies and organizations wanted to automate in order to make their lives easier, right? I mean, that was one of the hallmarks of Ansible, was that it allowed you to get more of the one thing that you could never actually get more of, and that was time. And so by automating a bunch of things, it enabled you to focus on more important work. And that's great because it gave you your weekends back and it made your life generally easier. But now really, this is an automation to survive requirement. Today in a pandemic gripped world or a post-COVID world, organizations, whether they're governmental or otherwise, needs really automate in order to survive. I mean, the only way we're going to continue to be able to offer the services that we do is by automating everything that can possibly be automated in order to ensure that we're moving along the scalability of these services that we're offering and continue to offer better and more detailed and capable service offerings with the agility that we gain out of these types of efforts. So, when you start to look at digital transformation a bit deeper, there are a handful of aspects of this, and none of this really should be new. I mean, any organization, and I would dare say pretty much every organization, is either in the process of their digital transformation efforts or IT modernization efforts, or alternatively is at least has some level or some number of services that are kind of already deployed in a more modern and agile way. I mean, so fundamentally, I think that when you look at automation, digital transformation, in many cases, you really can't do an effective digital transformation or IT modernization effort without a significant level of automation. And that is for a number of, I think, very important reasons. One is that it enables your teams to work smarter, right? I mean, if you think about the average team makeup, I would love to say that we only hire and everyone is always a rock star, but the reality is often, especially in government, you have contracting firms that you have to deal with. And in some cases, you get those rock stars, in some cases you don't. And you also have scenarios where perhaps your own staff, you have the really, really talented ones, and you have perhaps the more junior ones that are still learning. That's one of the beauties of automation, is that once one person learns or understands how to solve a problem, they can automate that solution, and then everyone on the team knows how to do it. So that allows teams to work smarter, and enabling teams is a huge piece of what needs to happen with not just digital transformation, but digital transformation done remotely. Business continuity is another big important part here. So, when you start to talk about the cloud, one of the big reasons that organizations want to go into cloud technologies is because of the improvements to business continuity. You no longer really have to worry about all of the underlying infrastructure and the access and whatnot. Now, of course, a lot of that complexity just gets moved up the stack into the application and really into the infrastructure deployment and management layers. However, that's all easily automatable as well. So these unprecedented requirements are really causing businesses and organizations to take a deeper look at their continuity requirements and put better motions into play to help ensure that they're able to migrate seamlessly and continuously expand access to their services. And then, of course, unlocking future capabilities. This is the idea of it being future-proof, right? I mean, automation is fundamentally a requirement to AI, machine learning, AI ops, all of that stuff. You have to have some pretty significant automation in order to begin to take action on together really to help improve an organization's ability to deliver greater value through IT modernization and digital transformation. All right, so up to this point, I've been talking kind of a lot about automation in general. I've mentioned Ansible a couple of times. Should be no surprise based on who's delivering this talk, as well as the title of it, that we're talking a bit about Ansible here. And for those of you that aren't intimately familiar with it, or immediately familiar with it, I should say, Ansible is a simple, powerful, and agentless automation platform. And I think that there are a number of reasons why organizations have really just continued to pick this up and use it. And I think that there are a couple of reasons why, if you haven't, it would be useful and valuable for you to have a look at it as well. So for starters, it's accessible, right? I mean, it's simple enough to be used by anyone on the IT team, by every IT team, and security teams and so forth. The other advantage of it is it just has an incredibly low barrier to entry. So unlike almost every other enterprise software capability or other enterprise software tool, this is extraordinarily easy to pick up, learn, and begin to use to do real things. It's also incredibly flexible. So there is just a massive list of integrations. I mean, I remember back in 2014 when I first started at Ansible, we had 205 modules, and I thought that we were like unbeatable, totally invincible with 200 some odd modules. I didn't count in the list that I looked at a couple of days ago, but it's got to be north of 2,000 modules now. I mean, it's an order of magnitude greater, and every single one of those modules conveys new capability, conveys new integrations that you can start to tie new workflows and new playbooks and roles into, which means that Ansible is incredibly customizable. And that customization is important because no two environments look the same. Even two environments within the same organization often look different. Two servers hosting different applications and right next to one another are going to look different. So that customization and that customizable platform is something that's going to be really important in order to see the benefits out of digital transformation and IT modernization. It's also powerful enough to really do pretty much anything. I mean, we used to make the joke that it's like, look, if you can basically write an algorithm, you can lay out a list of steps, the things that need to happen for something to be automated, then Ansible can likely do it. And boy, we've seen some really interesting use cases over the years. Everything from ringing a bell when a field was set in a database to trying to think, updating Touch ID sensors in offices. I mean, it's to updating and gathering data from ocean deployed buoys, all using Ansible. I mean, it's really quite fascinating when you start to look at the just flexibility of the platform. And to that avail, it's also incredibly popular. So because it's been highly accessible and very flexible, it is extremely popular, which means that there's a lot of help out there available for it. There is a lot of resourcing to help you do some of the more complex things that you're really going to, in the end, need to do in order to get the most value out of it. One of the other little things that is not necessarily widely known, but Ansible also was really designed from a cloud-first approach. So we at the very inception of this were looking kind of directly at folks like Amazon, Azure, and whatnot to make sure that that Ansible was a really powerful, capable tool on that front. And I think that cloud-first approach, which also led to a piece of why it's agentless, of course, have been very important in its ongoing popularity. All right, so when we start to kind of drill into this, and we talk about, all right, but I don't need to go into all the reasons why you would want to migrate some services to the cloud. The reality is that I think if every government organization does not have the mandate to use cloud resources when possible, most government organizations do on some level or another for clearly sensitive, unclassified stuff. And the thing here is that we've seen a kind of refined process work pretty well when it comes to using Ansible to actually help deploy services into cloud environments. And that is through what I call the 3D process, where you start with a definition, you use that definition to deploy, and then once deployed, you test in order to discover what changes might be necessary in order to get it working properly. So to go into a touch more detail here, I mean, if you think about the definition of an application or definition of a system, really is just a playbook, right? So you're writing a playbook to define that system as it runs in place, and you can do this in many cases on that running system where you basically run it in check mode on occasion if you want, but you're incrementally specifying all the things in a playbook that needed to happen to that system to make it look like it is. And then you use that playbook to actually deploy onto a new system. So whether that's in the cloud or on a VM or whatever, in a dev environment, doesn't really matter. But the point here is that you then, once deployed, test that instance or that app that you deployed for functionality. And when you find things that perhaps don't work or didn't work right, you identify what those gaps are, and you define those gaps or define those configuration requirements in the first step again. And you effectively lather, rinse, and repeat this process on every system, on a system an application by application basis. And what you end up with is an entire stack that is fully automated. So if you drill down in this just a little bit more, what you really end up with are a bunch of building blocks. And these aren't all things that you necessarily have to do completely on your own. There is a lot of help out there, which we'll talk about in a moment. But from an infrastructure point of view, you start by just defining the various compute, storage, and network components necessary for running your application. And then from that point, you're then laying down an operating system. I mean, frankly, when you instantiate the infrastructure in your cloud of choice, chances are that operating system is going to be deployed as part of that. But whether it's Linux or Windows or whatever, this enables you to begin to define kind of what that common build ultimately is for your organization. Now, there's a good chance that your group already has something like a standard build, and maybe you already applied a security baseline to it on some level or another. Maybe you haven't. But the reality is that it's kind of defining that common environment is a very important process in scaling out to really any environment, but certainly the cloud as well. And that might raise some additional questions around stewardship of the actual images. So how do you know that when you go to deploy this app, you're getting the most up-to-date image that has been blessed by security? How do you know that the apps that you've already deployed but perhaps need updating, how do you know that they're actually still compliant and secure? So there are still a lot of questions to be answered, and automation thankfully can help with every single one of those. So once an operating system is deployed, you then have your actual application layer. So the application automation will come in and effectively deploy the application on top of that operating system. It can also make one-off changes in configuration to that operating system to ensure that it runs. And then finally, you would wrap all of this up with your actual baseline. Some organizations may choose to actually baseline twice. So once they deploy the operating system, they would baseline it there as well, and then lay down the application and then re-baseline and validate that baseline again. That candidly is my preferred route. However, we recognize that few organizations, really too few organizations, will re-baseline their operating system after the application is installed. And a big piece of that has been because of tooling. One of the things that we've seen is that while it tends to be still a pain, but much easier to deploy a security baseline such as STIG or CIS on an operating system and application for that matter, at deployment time, it's very much more difficult to actually maintain that and do that over time. So the second you update that system or perhaps redeploy your application, if you haven't taken security into account in that process, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Because what's going to happen is in 6 months or a year, or whatever your next audit is, the security team is going to scan that system, and they're going to come at you with a big long list of things that you need to then audit. And so one important process in all of this absolutely is to absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, look to automate that security process using Ansible to help your organization avoid the pitfalls of what will happen inevitably when they drift out of compliance in your environment. So the good news to all of this, while it might seem relatively complex, there are, because of Ansible's popularity, just a tremendous number of things that can help with all of this. So on the cloud infrastructure side, I just dumped 3 links in here from Galaxy, assuming that most people are probably familiar with Galaxy. Ansible Galaxy is part of the Ansible automation platform. And Galaxy is a community-focused repository for automation content and modules and whatnot. So these 3 resources here for AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform all contain a treasure trove of automation content as well as modules to help you automate those environments. On the operating system side, similar deal here. So this Oasis roles actually comes direct from Red Hat. If you're running RHEL, there are also RHEL system roles that include a bunch of playbooks, roles, and modules to help you more effectively automate your RHEL systems. On the Windows side, there's also a tremendous amount of content out there for Windows, hundreds of modules that can do nearly anything that you possibly need on Windows. And in fact, that's where we see a lot of uptick and a lot of interest in actually running Ansible on Windows, especially in the cloud, because one of the things that happens when you start to run more ephemeral Windows instances, it often doesn't make sense for organizations to forklift all of their Active Directory infrastructure right back into the cloud. And so you have these ephemeral Windows systems, and those ephemeral Windows systems need management because they're not joined into a domain, which means things like group policy and SCCM and whatnot won't work. So Ansible to the rescue, and in fact, you can use Ansible to not just apply security baselines, but manage local user accounts and nearly anything else that you would need to do on a Windows system. When you start to think about the previous slide with these kind of building blocks in this process, this 3-tier app deployment example of land-based HA proxy will be very valuable to you. And I can tell you, in looking at a lot of these resources, this is how I learned back in 2014. It was sitting down and kind of dissecting and tearing apart the existing example and actually kind of building new stuff from there. And in fact, if I were to look at my GitHub repo right now, I think I still probably have a large number of demo environments that were totally based off of this particular example. So very, very seemingly simple, right? I mean, you're just installing a handful of things, but it's multi-tiered, multiple server. There's some OS stuff in there as well, so it gives you a great idea of what to do. And I would suggest using something like that as a fine mechanism to not just learn, but also to get to build out some of that capability. And then on the security side, we have Lockdown Enterprise. So this, in full transparency, is a MindPoint sponsored effort. That is actually available for free download. So we've got baselines for everything from RHEL 6 all the way from RHEL 8, Windows Server 2016, 2019, STIG, CIS, and then a handful of applications from there with more coming down the road. So what's important about that is Lockdown Enterprise really is, it's all Ansible end to end. We do have support available for that, but again, it's available for free, highly configurable, highly customizable based on the needs for your environment, and it really takes the guesswork out of applying your security baselines. So no longer do you need to scrape around looking for the best way to do it. You don't have to write your own stuff. You can just literally comment things out or in a config file and then run that through Ansible command line or Tower, and your systems will be validated, so you can actually use it to both validate compliance as well as remediate, which is huge, because to do that in an ongoing fashion solves a massive problem for IT organizations. Okay, so that's kind of the meat of what we had to talk about today. A couple of the other things that I want to kind of go over, and this is just some, like, call it friendly guiding advice. I've spoken over my tenure with thousands of customers, and I've seen a lot of successful ones, but I've also seen some that haven't been so successful. And so my bit of advice to you is number one, be patient, right? I mean, it's even with something as straightforward as Ansible, you can dig yourself a hole pretty quickly, and you can overcomplicate things, and you can end up in a scenario where you're perhaps not quite as good off as you really hope you were going to be. So don't be afraid to start small, make those incremental gains, like build on those incremental gains over time, and then frankly, don't overthink, right? Like if it's not kind of relatively simple to do it, the chances are there's perhaps a better way to do it with Ansible, and that's one of the things that we've seen pretty frequently where people, because they just don't have the in-depth understanding necessary. The entire platform, often end up overcomplicating, over-architecting, and over-engineering Ansible-based solutions, and that ultimately ends up causing them all manner of headache down the road. So while Ansible, yes, is very simple and straightforward, most of the Ansible that you deploy should also feel relatively simple and straightforward. If you're looking at your role or looking at your role and having a hard time unpacking what's going on, chances are you're using it like a programming language, and that's not what you should be doing. On the flip side, of course, you also do need to be methodical, right? I mean, it can be automated, it should be automated. You want to work methodically to expand the automation audience. One thing that we've seen be very successful with a number of organizations over the years are that when they would actually develop a culture of automation, and often what they had internally was effectively an automation service desk. So they would have an automation team that would stand up the infrastructure required for automation, and then steward the training and resourcing to many of the other teams that would then be responsible for doing a lot of the automation themselves. So typically, the more your organization spreads out the love of Ansible, the more successful they're going to be, and the quicker you're going to get those important results. And then finally, get help, right? I mean, you don't really have to go it alone. If you're stuck, ask for help. There are a number of different ways to access that help. We'll talk about a couple in a moment. But whether you're looking at just consulting or product support, those are certainly avenues you can look down. There are also, as you saw in the previous slide, a number of community-based resources, and that helps with the popularity too, right? I mean, because Ansible is quite popular, there are just a ton of people out there that are willing to help, willing to assist in its use. And to that, we can help. So My Point Group, again, we are automation experts. And through DLT here, have the ability to bring this to bear in a number of different ways, contract vehicles. So for starters, I talked a bunch about Lockdown Enterprise. Absolutely take a look at it. We're just really happy with it. It is by far and away some of the best Ansible content at scale we've seen written. Again, people that built the Ansible business are the people that are behind the offering of that content. We have something relatively new also called Ansible Counselor. So think of this as really on-demand access to Ansible experts. So when you have a question and you're really stuck in a corner, you can either bang your head against the wall for several days trying to figure it out, or you can pick the phone and call us. But the goal of this offering really is to help you get faster results by eliminating that barrier to expertise. Pick a phone, call us. In many cases, we will build an automation for you and then support it in an ongoing fashion. So this is not a replacement for product support. This really is in addition to ideally product support. We can't fix a bug in the underlying Ansible code base, but we can help you either work around it or alternatively, we can help automate things that you probably never thought possible. And then finally, we also do have end-to-end automation consulting. So if you have a whole project already thought out, or you know exactly what it is you want, I am deploying vCloud Director and I want to automate all of that and apply baselines to that, and then I'm going to deploy a bunch of Microsoft Windows systems into that, and tuck them all behind a firewall and make these applications available, and then I want that whole entire environment to be automated end to end. We can absolutely do that. In fact, we just did. Ansible Counselor only goes so far, but really it's intended to help you better understand how to effectively use Ansible in your environment, and it serves almost like on-the-job training in a way. It's very, very cool. All right. So with that, again, I want to thank our sponsor here at DLT for hosting this webinar. There are a couple of kind of calls to action here. So for starters, if you have a tricky question that you would like to ask us, you can do that for free. There's a form there at the Try Out Ansible Counselor page in my point group, and we would be happy to engage in that discussion with you. No strings attached. Ask us the question, and we will get you an answer. It's that easy. You can also now download Lockdown Enterprise. So this is a link to the page, fill out a little form, and we'll give you a link back with all of the downloads on it. Again, totally free. So there's no requirement there. Of course, support is available, but not a requirement. And then finally, if you have other questions or just want to continue the discussion, by all means, let us know how we can help you with your cybersecurity policy. Let us know how we can help you with your automation. And with that, thank you very much.